Tide's rising. What's it gonna be?
I'm not telling you shit.
Well, enjoy drowning.
The ocean's tides are not a force to be reckoned with. Powered from gravity of a rock hurtling around the Earth, as well as a sun with the power of 1,000,000 nukes. Not to mention, the Earth is covered 71% in water. And as boaters, we need to know how to understand the tides to avoid hazardous tidal currents, waves, and the ever-embarrassing beach stranding. Tides are caused by the gravitational pull of both the moon and the sun. As they dance around the Earth, they push and pull on the water, and they create high and low tides every single day. These patterns can be predicted to a T, years and years in advance, giving us an excellent reference of what the tides are going to do. Tidal swings differ greatly depending on the time of year and where you are in the world. For example, in French Polynesia, there are very little tidal swings. That allows the infrastructure to be safe near the water and allows for you to build some sweet bungalows for tourists right over the ocean. Other areas have massive tidal swings for various factors like the coastline and their continental shelves. Nova Scotia's famous Bay of Fundy draws all of its tourism from its tidal swings, with 53 feet of change happening in a single day. Another tidal phenomenon to know about is a spring tide, otherwise known as a king tide. These happen on new and full moons when the Earth, Sun, and Moon all align and their gravities combined to create greater tidal swings. And the Parisian spring tide is the highest tide of the year, and that is when not only is the Sun, the Earth, and the Moon all aligned, but they're also all the closest to each other.
Towards the mountains!
Those aren't mountains. They're waves.
Oh shit.
Do you know the difference between a riptide and a rip current? Well, how about a tidal wave and a tsunami? Well, you better. A riptide is caused by, well, a tide moving through a narrow channel or an inlet. Whereas a rip current occurs mainly in the surf, where a column of water moves away from the shore due to sandbars. A tidal wave is a shallow water wave caused by severe tide swings and is a product of a riptide. Or, in the case of Interstellar's Miller planet, the force of gravity causes a constant tidal wave every 3.5 hours, or 24.5 years on Earth.
Brand Doyle, back to the Ranger now.
Tsunamis, on the other hand, are caused by a wider range of things, including earthquakes, near shore and in the ocean, volcanic eruptions, and underwater and onshore landslides. So, why do boaters need to know about the tides?
I'm afraid the tides will not allow us to bring the ship into port before nightfall.
I'm sorry, Captain, but I do not know much about the tides. Can you explain something to me?
Of course, Your Highness.
Well, tides can affect many things, like how much line you need to tie up to a dock, or how much clearance you have to sail under a bridge, whether or not your boat's going to bottom out, or how long you can safely anchor, and when you can safely pass narrow channels.
Well then, maybe you should worry less about the tides, who've already made up their mind about killing you, and worry more about me, who's still mulling it over.
I'll pull us in.
The easiest way to figure out what the tide is doing is by reading a tide chart. The local tide charts are available all over the place. From tide reading watches to calendars and websites, there's no excuse for not knowing the tides. The basis behind tides is that it takes about 6+ hours for tides to get from low to high and vice versa. So a high tide occurs every 12 hours and 25 minutes, which means that it takes 6 hours and 12.5 minutes to go from a high tide to a low tide. Tide charts are specific to a local area, so let's see how to read them. On one axis, you have your height of the water, and on the other, you have the time of day. They're usually in 6-hour increments, so you can look and see when the highest high tide will be and when the lowest low tide will be, and you can look across at the height of the water and see how many feet that'll be and also what it'll swing over those 6 hours. Well, what if you don't have access to a tide chart? Your radio's down, you can't ask for help. Well, if you do a little bit of math, you can figure out what the tide's gonna do. In the first hour after slack tide, the water will flow 1/12 of its total volume over the course of the tide. In the second hour, it'll flow 2/12, and in the third hour, it'll flow 3/12, where it peaks at its maximum tidal flow. Then, as the tide eases, it goes back down. 3/12, 2/12, and then finally in the sixth hour, 1/12. Now, this is pretty much all you can do to prepare for tides as a boater. So respect the tides, because they're a deadly force. Guy really should have learned his tides.